Hi there. Welcome to my Microteaching Lesson, the proper one this time. So I know that you already saw these resources if you looked at the last one, but I just want to really quickly go through them again and kind of show off what the basis of this lesson was. For context of what you're going to see in the video, I'm kind of taking the position of us already having looked at the documents that are available here, that being this one about Latinos fighting in World War II and this one about the Zoot Suit riots, and some of the context of as the lesson is taking place is that the students would have been given the prompt, the writing prompt, before these readings, so they could be thinking about the questions they would be answering as they were looking at the lesson in context. When the video begins, you'll hear me talking about how the students have already referenced this, and the students that I used for this case did go through and read the documents and beforehand, and we had a small discussion about that as we would in class. Um, and again, they used two types of prompts. One of them was fully in Spanish with the recommended sentence structure, like blocks in English, and the other one uh, is supposed to be fully in English. I think I opened the wrong one, but there is a fully English version of this. Let me see if I can find it. There it is. Fully English version of it that I would hand out to my native English speakers. Other than that, that's kind of the context for the lesson, and let me hop right into that. All right, guys, so now that we've talked a little bit about the experience of Latino American service members and looked at the Zoot Suit riots and the discrimination that Latino Americans faced during the era of World War II, I want you guys to reference the prompt that you were shown earlier in the day before we did the reading, and now we're going to go through and do that writing that it was talking about. Again, I'm not looking for a whole essay here. It's just going to be a single paragraph, 5 to 7 sentences. I want you to as you're going through, reference the writings, but don't worry about doing parenthetical MLS citations. Just say, in the article about the Zoot Suit riots or the article about Latino American servicemen, I read this, and then go from there, right? So nothing super crazy. I just want you to express your thoughts. Here's a piece of paper. Go ahead and write your name and the date at the top right. If you need it, the date is July 7th. And you guys are going to have about 6 minutes here to do your writing. Make sure that you reference the text at least twice. And otherwise, I want to hear some of what you guys think. Make sure you make arguments about what you're thinking. Reference the questions that are in the prompt to argue whether or not you think these experiences are comparable between Latino Americans during the era of World War II and Latino Americans during our time. Go right on ahead. I look forward to seeing what you guys write.
¿Puedo leer el documento al mismo tiempo que estoy escribiendo?
Sí. Feel free to ask any questions. I'm here to help clarify anything that you guys might be confused about. How are we doing over here? Do you feel like you're understanding it so far?
Sí, todavía está bien.
This is good so far, Luis.
Sí, tengo una pregunta. De,
Can you try practicing that in English? Do you think you can ask the question in English?
sí, the historical references
Mhm.
for the inclusion of a Mexican American citizen that were confronted with violence with the military.
Yeah.
That's what you want for the historical relevance
Yeah.
in the parallel.
So think about how comparable those experiences are, right? Because these were young men that were they were dressing up in a fad, but they got associated with gang violence. That was the perception in society at the time, right?
Uh-huh.
So think about how our society thinks about and portrays undocumented immigrants on the news, right? Are they portrayed as the people that work our fields, that work in stores, that work in restaurants, that provide for us? Or are they portrayed as criminals or people that are dangerous to our society? So think about as you're writing if those situations are comparable. Are the zoot suiters and the discrimination they face, is that the same as the discrimination that immigrants face in America today?
Got it.
And your next sentence, try to see if you can write it in English. If there's anything you get caught on, any words or phrases, just write them in Spanish and we can translate later.
Okay.
You're doing great so far.
Gracias.
How are we doing over here, Gina? Everything going okay?
I think so. Is it okay if I only use one of the resources? Or do I have to reference both?
I'd prefer if you can reference both, right? That's why I gave you two, because they're both connected together, right? Think about how the service members went out and they thought when they got home as war heroes, right? People that went and fought the Nazis, the Japanese, the Italian fascists, right? They thought, oh, I'm going to get home and I'm going to be a citizen. But did that really pan out for them? No, not really, right? So think about also how undocumented immigrants are often performing labor for our country under the same kind of pretext, right? Thinking that, hey, if I do enough work, maybe I'll be recognized in the same way. Is this experience comparable, right? So don't just use one or the other. Use both of them because they're both relevant to this discussion. You guys have about 30 seconds left. Don't worry if you can't finish. Just express your thoughts as best as you can and we'll go from there. Okay, and pencils down. Don't worry if you guys weren't able to finish. I know that you guys have some thoughts in your head, so even if you weren't able to write everything down, let's talk a little bit. Luis, what did you think about this topic? How were you able to relate it?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of parallels in the way the suit suitors were treated and discriminated against with what we see today.
Okay, Gina, what about you? Did you find any room for comparison?
Yes, I think they were too because they were targeted specifically because of the way they look.
Yeah, and do we feel like that's happening today when we see the deportations happening to us? Do we think that is a something that is happening specifically because they're all undocumented, or do we feel like people are being targeted specifically because of the way they look as well?
Oh, there's a big component on the way
Oh,
they look.
yes, because people that are not even immigrants, that their citizenship is natural born citizens, are being targeted.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. All right. So this is going to be kind of my post-op slash reflection on the experience that I had in doing this lesson. So the first thing I want to kind of comment on here and kind of reflect on is the amount of work that my students were able to complete. So when looking at my native English speaker, she was able to provide a nearly a full paragraph. This is about 4 sentences in the 6 minutes I gave them, versus my native Spanish speaker who gave me one sentence in native Spanish, right? So there's a couple things for me to think about here, right? In terms of skill level, right? Clearly that one student was at another skill level than the other. So in reflecting on this, one thing I need to think about is that the lesson I did would probably take place, given that it was in World War II, would probably take place in second semester, maybe a little bit later on in the second semester with like the second or third month. So something to consider in the performance that I got here, right, is that this is a skill I would be building the entire time. So it would be something interesting to think about in terms of this might be what I would expect in, given that this was the student's first time doing something like this, like in reality. This is something I could probably expect from a first time of a student doing something like this on the first day of class and the first time I tried this, right? But I would be building that student to be getting somewhere closer to this, where in that 6 minutes they were able to provide a more complete paragraph with more thoughts and expressed and more references to the text. But something I did notice that my native Spanish speaking student did was something very interesting, where you can see right here, if you can read, this is an introduction and then historical parallel. So what this student tried to how they try to compromise with their skill, right, is they followed my prompting with the starter sentence and the body sentences to try to organize their thoughts. So that tells me that this is a good idea, even if this isn't a structured in the standard that we typically want a paragraph to be structured in, like an English class, for example. This is showing that the student was actively engaging with the prompts I laid out in front of them, and trying to use them to organize their thoughts into a way that they were able to make sense of in their own head. Something else, because the native Spanish speaker produced their reflection in complete Spanish, it lets me know that my prompt wasn't specific enough about the detail about them needing to produce their response in English. So that is something for me to think about, right? I kind of tacked on the request to write the paragraph in English at the end of the requirements. Perhaps it's something that I need to reiterate a couple times, that this should be in English, this should be in English, this should be in English, and multiple times um, throughout the prompt. It is possible that because I typed the prompt in Spanish for them to have easier time reading it, that it misled them about this. So it is something that I need to consider in placing maybe in bold text somewhere, that the actual assignment needs to be turned in English, as much English as possible. But with that all aside, reading both of these paragraphs, right, I can see my native English speaker directly reference the text, talking about an experience of what's his name, Jose Diaz, who was a Mexican American who was murdered, and 17 other Latino Americans were charged with the crime of conspiracy in conducting that, right? And the student used that as an example of being like, hey, like, like these Latino Americans were targeted. Like, this wasn't just like a pursuit of justice. This was like vigilante in nature, right? And while my Spanish native speaker didn't get to the actual proving of an argument, he did show some what's the word I'm looking for here, understanding of how to make the argument, right? Because he says at the end here that he believes that the undocumented immigrants of today took the place of the Zoot Suiters. In essence, that's what he wrote in Spanish, and basically trying to argue that, yeah, like that mantle, if you want to even call it that, maybe it's the wrong word, was transferred from that one cultural group that expressed culture in one way to another cultural group in our modern time. And clearly, in saying that he had this historical parallel section, he was ready and ready to move on to proving that point. So in like a final thought, right? When I think about this, this lesson itself was meant to be very short, 10 minutes tops, and I try to keep everything in that recording window that way. But in my actual class, the way that I'd run this is I'd probably dedicate 20 minutes to this. I'd probably have 30 minutes for the studying and the early discussion, and then 20 minutes for the writing and the post discussion of the topic, to make sure that my students that maybe wrote a little bit slower, needed more time, got that time to do so. Um, but overall, I had a lot of fun doing this experience. It was very interesting working with the two people I chose, because they did the skills expressed here weren't just it wasn't just fake. These were actual skill expressions from these people of their ability to do these things in this context. And it really kind of made me think about how I structure my lessons, and how I make sure I make the most of my time, in taking into consideration the needs of my native speakers in other languages who might need more time to work on these things, and additional supports to make sure that they keep up with my native English speakers. So these are things I'm going to be thinking about as I go into my teaching experience.